The sky that morning was a soft gray, brushing muted colors across the sleepy town as Emma parked her little blue car in front of the shelter. Her heart thudded with a mixture of nerves and excitement. Today was the day she had decided, after months of loneliness and quiet nights, to open her heart to a dog who needed her. She zipped her jacket against the cool breeze and stepped inside, the jingling of the bell above the door announcing her arrival. The scent of cleaning supplies mixed with the faint, musky smell of animals in the air. But what struck her more was the sound, the chaotic chorus of barks, whines, and occasional purrs that echoed through the large space. Emma stood there, for a moment, soaking it all in, before a cheerful volunteer approached, clipboard in hand. After a quick conversation about her living situation and experience with pets, Emma was ushered toward a row of kennels, each containing a soul waiting for a second chance. She passed by a few puppies tumbling over each other, their eager eyes pleading for attention. She smiled, but her steps slowed when she reached the far end of the corridor. There, sitting quietly against the back wall of his kennel, was a golden Labrador. His head was low, his tail still, and his deep brown eyes held a sadness so profound that it rooted Emma to the spot. There was no frantic barking, no bouncing against the kennel door, just a silent, hopeful gaze that seemed to look straight into her heart. "That's Charlie," the volunteer said softly, noticing Emma's transfixed expression. "He's about 5 years old. Came in about a week ago. Sweetest boy you'll ever meet, but he's been having a hard time adjusting." Emma knelt slowly, reaching her fingers toward the wire mesh. Charlie lifted his head slightly, hesitated, and then pressed his nose gently against her hand. The connection was immediate, electric, and Emma felt tears prickling behind her eyes. She had no idea why this dog was here, or what his story was, but something deep inside her stirred, a pull so strong it left no room for doubt. "I'd like to meet him," she whispered. Minutes later, she was led into a small visiting room where Charlie was released to her. He approached with cautious steps, his tail giving a hesitant wag as he sniffed her jeans and hands. Emma sat cross-legged, on the floor, making herself small and unthreatening, allowing him to set the pace. After a few minutes, Charlie sighed, a long, weary sound, and laid his head on her lap as though he had finally found somewhere safe to rest. Emma stroked his soft fur, feeling the tremors of nervousness still running through him, and whispered nonsense words of comfort. Time seemed to slow around them, the world outside fading away until there was nothing left but this fragile new bond blooming quietly in a corner of the shelter. The volunteer returned after a while, smiling at the sight of them. "Looks like he's chosen you," she said warmly. Paperwork was hastily filled out, an adoption fee paid, and before she quite knew what was happening, Emma was walking Charlie out into the cool afternoon air, the leash light in her hand, but heavy with responsibility. Charlie's steps were tentative at first, his body low to the ground as though expecting something bad to happen, but he followed her without protest. Emma opened the back door of her car and patted the seat. "Come on, sweet boy," she coaxed. Charlie hesitated for only a second before jumping in, curling up tightly as though trying to take up as little space as possible. She drove carefully, casting frequent glances at him in the rearview mirror. Each time she looked, he was watching her, those soulful eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. When they pulled up to her small house, Emma clipped the leash back onto his collar and led him to the front door. She knelt again before entering, letting him sniff and explore at his own pace. The house was modest, a cozy living room with a worn couch, a tiny kitchen, and a small fenced backyard. But to Emma, it was filled with the warmth of possibilities. She had set out a new dog bed, bowls of fresh water and kibble, and a basket of toys she had excitedly picked out the day before. Charlie padded in slowly, sniffing the corners and furniture, his tail tucked but his nose busy. Emma let him roam, resisting the urge to smother him with affection just yet. When he finally approached her again, she knelt and opened her arms. Charlie leaned into her, pressing his body against her chest with a deep sigh. Emma wrapped her arms around him gently, feeling the tremble still in his body. "You're home now," she whispered into his golden fur. "You're safe. I promise." It was then, as she rubbed behind his ears, that her fingers brushed against something odd, a small lump beneath the worn leather of his old shelter collar. She frowned, running her fingers along the collar until she found it, a tiny knot securing a crumpled piece of paper tucked underneath. Curious, but thinking it was perhaps an old tag or a forgotten label, she decided to wait. Charlie had been through enough for one day. She removed his collar carefully, replacing it with the brand new one she had bought, a deep navy blue with a silver bone-shaped tag that read simply, Charlie, loved. As evening fell and Charlie dozed beside her on the couch, Emma sat with the old collar in her lap, her fingers tracing the hidden paper with growing apprehension. She knew she should probably open it, but something in her heart warned her. Whatever was written, there would change everything. The house was silent except for the soft ticking of the clock and Charlie's rhythmic breathing. Emma stared at the little knot, feeling the weight of an unseen story pressing down on her chest, and took a deep, steadying breath. Tomorrow, she decided. Tomorrow she would read it. Tonight she and Charlie would simply be two lost souls, finding comfort in each other, unaware of the heartbreak waiting quietly between the folds of a forgotten note. The first morning in her home should have been joyful, full of tail wags, playful barking, and new beginnings. But instead, Emma awoke to a heartbreaking stillness. She opened her eyes to the dim light of dawn filtering through the curtains, and immediately looked toward the dog bed beside her couch where Charlie had curled up the night before. He wasn't there. Panic flickered through her chest until she heard the faint sound of claws gently tapping against the hardwood floor. Sitting up quickly, she spotted him near the front door, curled into a tight ball, his golden body trembling with silent anxiety. Emma's heart broke a little more at the sight. Moving slowly so as not to startle him, she approached and knelt beside him. Charlie lifted his head slightly but didn't move otherwise, his deep brown eyes glistening with uncertainty. Emma extended her hand, palm up, and waited. After a long, aching moment, Charlie inched closer, pressing his wet nose against her skin as if checking whether she was still the same person who had promised him safety the day before. She whispered soft words of reassurance, petting his head gently, feeling the sadness woven into his very bones. "You're home now, Charlie," she said again, willing him to believe it. "You're safe." But trust, she knew, wasn't built in a day, especially with hearts that had been shattered before. Emma spent that first day doing everything she could to make Charlie feel at ease. She left the front door open to the backyard so he could wander freely, made sure fresh water and food were always available, and spoke to him constantly in a low, soothing voice. Yet Charlie moved through the house like a ghost, present, but hollow. He showed no interest in toys, even when Emma tried to entice him with a game of gentle tug-of-war. He ate, but only if she left the room, and he drank silently when he thought she wasn't watching. It was clear that this dog had known love once, real, deep love, but had also known the devastation of losing it. And as much as it hurt Emma to admit it, she knew that her presence alone wouldn't be enough to heal him overnight. Still, she refused to give up. As afternoon turned into evening, she decided to try something new. She clipped on Charlie's leash and gently encouraged him outside. The late sunlight cast a golden glow across the neighborhood, and the crisp air smelled of fallen leaves and distant wood smoke. Charlie hesitated at the threshold, his body tense, but after a moment's encouragement, he stepped outside with her. They walked slowly, Emma letting Charlie set the pace. Every sound made him flinch, a distant car door slamming, the bark of another dog behind a fence. But gradually, step by careful step, he began to relax. Emma kept talking to him softly, praising him for every brave move. When they reached the little park 2 blocks away, Charlie paused, sniffing the cool breeze, his ears perking up slightly at the distant laughter of children playing. Emma found a quiet bench tucked under a sprawling oak tree and sat down, letting the leash fall slack in her hand. Charlie stood beside her for a long time, surveying the open space, before finally lying down at her feet with a weary sigh. Emma watched him, her heart aching. She wished she could ask him about the life he had before, the people who had loved him, the home he had lost. But all she could do was be here, quietly, patiently, offering him a new chapter when he was ready to turn the page. The park slowly emptied as twilight deepened, the sky painting itself in streaks of lavender and gold. Emma rose and gave Charlie a gentle tug on the leash. "Come on, sweet boy," she murmured. "Let's go home." And that time, when he looked up at her, there was the smallest flicker of trust. In his tired eyes, a tiny, fragile spark that gave her hope. Back at home, she fed him dinner and left him alone to eat while she made herself a simple meal. She kept the television low in the background, soft voices, soothing sounds, so the house wouldn't feel so empty. Afterward, she settled onto the couch with a blanket and a book, pretending to read while really watching Charlie from the corner of her eye. He stood at the edge of the living room, torn between his instincts to retreat and his longing for connection. Finally, with careful, tentative steps, he approached the couch. Emma didn't move. She simply waited, heart pounding in her chest as Charlie hopped up beside her and curled into a tight ball at her side. She reached out slowly, running her fingers along his back. His body was stiff at first, but gradually, he melted into her touch, releasing a trembling sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 lonely nights. Tears pricked at Emma's eyes, but she blinked them away, not wanting to make this moment about her. It was about Charlie, about his bravery, his trust, his silent, aching hope. She didn't need to know his whole story to understand the scars he carried. They were written in the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way he hovered at the edges of the room, the way he watched her with that heartbreaking mix of longing and fear. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the crumpled note hidden in his old collar. What truths it might hold, what pieces of his broken heart it might reveal. She had tucked the collar away in a drawer, unable to bring herself to open it yet. Maybe she was afraid that whatever was written there would be too much to bear. Or maybe she simply wanted to give Charlie a fresh start before digging into the pain of his past. Either way, the note felt like a tiny ticking clock, counting down to a revelation she wasn't sure she was ready for. As the evening wore on, Charlie's breathing evened out, and Emma realized with a lump in her throat that he had fallen asleep, against her side. She dared not move, hardly dared to breathe. Instead, she sat there in the growing darkness, her hand resting lightly on his golden fur, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time since she had brought him home, Charlie wasn't trembling. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't mourning. He was simply resting, trusting her to keep him safe. And in that quiet, sacred moment, Emma made a silent vow. Whatever secrets that note revealed, whatever sorrow Charlie carried from his past, she would be strong enough to face it. She would love him through it, because she had already fallen for this gentle, broken soul, and no matter what, she wasn't going to let him down. The next morning dawned slowly, a thick fog blanketing the streets and muffling the usual sounds of the waking town. Emma stirred under her warm quilt, blinking into the soft grayness of her living room, her body still molded to the curve of the couch where she had fallen asleep beside Charlie. She shifted carefully, not wanting to disturb him, but when she looked down, she saw that he was already awake, lying quietly with his chin resting on his paws, watching her with those soulful, brown eyes. Something about the way he stared at her this morning, different from yesterday, somehow heavier, as if carrying a silent question, made Emma's heart tighten in her chest. She gave him a sleepy smile and stroked his head. "Good morning, sweet boy," she whispered, feeling the weight of a new day pressing down on her shoulders. She knew she couldn't put it off any longer. She had to open the note. She had to know. Rising slowly, Emma crossed the living room, Charlie's gaze following her with quiet intensity. She opened the drawer of the side table where she had hidden the old collar and retrieved it, her fingers trembling slightly. There, still knotted to the worn leather, was the crumpled piece of paper, yellowed at the edges and soft with wear. She sat back down on the couch, the collar in her lap, and took a deep, steadying breath. Charlie rose and padded over to her, resting his head gently on her knee, as if he understood what she was about to do and wanted her to know she wasn't alone. Emma untied the tiny knot with painstaking care, the paper resisting her efforts as though it, too, wanted to keep its secrets hidden. Finally, she freed it and unfolded it slowly, her heart hammering so loudly in her ears that she almost missed the soft whimper Charlie let out. She looked down at the note, the shaky handwriting scrawled across it in blue ink, and began to read, "To whoever finds him, please love him like we did. His name is Charlie. He's the best boy in the whole world. He loves peanut butter, belly rubs, and long naps in the sun. He's scared of thunderstorms, so please hold him close when it rains. We didn't want to leave him, but we had no choice. Our home is gone. We are gone. Please don't blame him for being scared. He's just looking for his family. Please, be his new family. Tell him we're sorry. Tell him we love him. Always." The words blurred before Emma's eyes as the first tear slipped free, tracing a hot, bitter path down her cheek. She clutched the note to her chest, as if trying to absorb. The heartbreak etched into every word. Gone. The family who had loved Charlie, who had raised him and cherished him, was gone. She could picture it now. The house foreclosed or abandoned, disaster or tragedy looming over them like a storm cloud they couldn't escape. Maybe they had lost everything to a fire, or fallen on hard times, forced to make the unthinkable decision to surrender the only piece of their heart they had left. Emma didn't know the full story, but the pain embedded in those few short sentences was enough. It told her everything she needed to know about why Charlie moved like a shadow, why he slept by the door, why he woke in the night trembling from dreams of a life he could no longer return to. Emma set the collar and note gently on the coffee table, wiped her tears with the sleeve of her sweatshirt, and turned to Charlie. He was watching her with such an expression of naked vulnerability that it undid her completely. She slid off the couch and knelt in front of him, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Oh, Charlie," she whispered brokenly. "I'm so sorry you went through all of that. I'm so sorry you lost them." Charlie stiffened for a moment, old instincts warning him against the unexpected. But then he melted into her, pressing his full weight against her chest as though anchoring himself to her. His body shook slightly, a tremor so subtle most would have missed it, but Emma felt it deep and raw, and she knew that in some way he was grieving right alongside her. They stayed like that for a long time, a tangle of loss and love, until the sun finally burned through the fog and lit the living room in a soft golden glow. Emma sat back on her heels and cupped Charlie's face in her hands, her voice steady even as her heart quaked. "They asked me to love you, Charlie," she said, searching his eyes, "and I promise you, with everything I have, I will. I'm your family now." Something flickered deep within him, a light, a tentative hope, and Emma knew that even if it took days, weeks, or months, she would rebuild the trust that had been so brutally shattered. They would find their way together, one small step at a time. She decided then to honor the family who had loved Charlie by giving him a life that would make them proud. She would learn his favorite games, his quirks, his fears, and his dreams. She would be the steady hand he could trust, the safe place he could always return to, and in return, she knew Charlie would offer her something priceless: unconditional love, loyalty beyond measure, and the silent, unbreakable bond of two souls who had found each other in a broken world. She glanced at the note one more time, her throat tightening. "I'll tell him," she whispered to the memory of the family who had loved him first. "I'll tell him you love him. I'll tell him every day." That evening, Emma dug through her kitchen cupboards until she found an old jar of peanut butter. She scooped a small spoonful and offered it to Charlie, watching as his nose twitched and his ears perked up slightly. Tentatively, he licked the spoon, his tail giving a cautious wag. Emma laughed softly, the sound catching in her throat, and wiped away another tear. "There you go, sweet boy," she said. "It's your favorite, isn't it?" They curled up together on the couch again, Charlie's head resting on her lap, his body heavier and more relaxed than before. She stroked his fur slowly, whispering stories about the adventures they would have, the places they would go, the memories they would build together. And for the first time since she had brought him home, Charlie closed his eyes, and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, his breathing steady and sure, as if finally believing that he was safe, that he was home, and that he was loved. The days that followed unfolded like the slow blooming of a stubborn flower, each moment of trust between Emma and Charlie a small miracle against the backdrop of all he had lost. Every morning, Emma would wake to find Charlie waiting near the bow couch, his tail giving a hesitant wag the moment their eyes met. She made it a ritual to greet him with gentle words and soft strokes along his golden back, anchoring him in the new reality she was building for them both. The weather had turned crisp and bright, autumn pressing its cool fingers against the windows, and Emma took to walking Charlie every morning under the fiery canopy of changing leaves. At first, he clung close to her side, hyper-aware of every shifting shadow, every stranger's passing glance, but slowly, with the patience of 1,000 whispered reassurances, Charlie began to explore the world beyond the leash. He sniffed trees and lampposts, lifted his face to the wind, and even, once or twice, let out a tentative bark at the scattering squirrels that dared to cross his path. Emma celebrated each tiny victory, her heart swelling with pride every time he took a step forward without fear, every time he chose trust over terror. But healing, she knew, wasn't linear. There were nights when Charlie would wake from nightmares, whimpering low and broken in his sleep, his legs twitching as if trying to outrun some unseen horror. Emma would sit beside him, her hand resting lightly on his side until the tremors eased, whispering nonsense words of comfort, promising over and over that he was safe now, that he would never be abandoned again. Sometimes in the early hours of the morning when the world was silent and still, she would read the note tied to his old collar again, as if by doing so she could remind herself, and Charlie, that he was loved before, and he was loved now, and that love, despite all the loss stitched into his past, would be the thing to carry him through. Gradually, Charlie's moments of fear became fewer, his steps more confident. Emma caught him sunbathing in patches of light on the living room floor, his body stretched out in contented surrender. She found him wagging his tail when she came, home from errands, not with the frantic, desperate energy of a dog afraid of being forgotten, but with a quiet, steady happiness that said, "I knew you'd come back." One Saturday afternoon, Emma decided it was time for a bigger adventure. She packed a small bag with water, treats, and a well-worn ball she had finally coaxed Charlie into playing with, and drove them both to a nearby nature trail. The forest welcomed them with dappled sunlight and the fresh scent of pine needles. Charlie trotted alongside her, his leash slack between them, ears perked and eyes bright with curiosity. When they reached a clearing by a bubbling creek, Emma unclipped the leash and held her breath. For a heartbeat, Charlie froze, looking back at her with wide, uncertain eyes. Emma knelt and clapped her hands softly, encouraging him. "It's okay, Charlie," she called. "Go explore, sweet boy." Hesitantly, he took a few steps away from her, sniffing the grass, then more, until he was bounding across the clearing, his golden fur gleaming in the sunlight, his tail a proud, joyous banner behind him. Emma laughed, a bright, unguarded sound that echoed through the trees. And when Charlie glanced back at her, his mouth open in what could only be described as a doggy grin, she felt tears prick her eyes again. But this time, they were tears of joy. They spent hours there, Emma tossing the ball and Charlie chasing it down with clumsy, exuberant leaps, splashing in the shallow edges of the creek, and resting together under the shade of an old oak tree. Emma spoke to him constantly, telling him about her hopes and dreams, about the home she was building for them, about the simple, beautiful life she envisioned, a life where he would never again wonder if he was wanted, never again feel the sting of abandonment. And though Charlie couldn't understand the words, he seemed to understand the love woven into every syllable, for he stayed close to her side, nudging her hand with his nose, leaning his weight against her whenever she paused. As the sun began to set and the sky flamed with hues of orange and pink, Emma clipped the leash back onto Charlie's collar and began the walk back to the car, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. That night, after a warm bath and a hearty dinner, Charlie curled up on the couch beside Emma as she read a book, his head resting heavily on her lap. She stroked his ears absently, marveling at how far he had come in such a short time. The transformation wasn't complete. There were still ghosts that haunted him, still shadows that sometimes crossed his eyes when certain sounds or smells triggered old memories. But it was undeniable. Charlie was healing. And in helping him heal, Emma realized, she was healing too. She had adopted Charlie thinking she was saving him, but in truth, he was saving her just as much, teaching her about resilience, about unconditional love, about the beauty of opening one's heart even after it's been broken. As she sat there, the lamp casting a warm golden pool of light around them, Emma glanced at the coffee table where Charlie's old collar and the worn note still rested. She reached over, picked them up gently, and tucked them into a small wooden box she had found at the antique store downtown. A box she would keep always, as a testament to the family who had loved Charlie first, and to the journey that had brought him into her life. She closed the lid, feeling a sense of peace settle over her, and turned her attention back to the beautiful soul resting trustingly in her lap. Leaning down, she pressed a soft kiss to the top of Charlie's head. "I love you, Charlie," she whispered, "always." And though the house was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the soft turning of pages, Emma could have sworn she felt an invisible thread tighten between them, a bond made not of blood or history, but of choice, of healing, of the kind of love that survives even the darkest of storms. As the night deepened and Charlie's breathing grew slow and steady with sleep, Emma closed her eyes too, her heart finally at rest, knowing that they had both found exactly what they needed, a place to belong, a place to heal, and above all, a place to call home. The morning of Charlie's special day arrived wrapped in a gentle hush. The world outside softened by a thin mist that clung to the trees and rooftops like a dream reluctant to let go. Emma stood in the kitchen, a small smile playing on her lips as she packed a canvas tote with everything she would need. Charlie's favorite peanut butter biscuits, a thick blanket, a small framed photo she had found tucked behind the shelter paperwork, a snapshot of a younger Charlie with a laughing little boy, and, cradled carefully in tissue paper, the old leather collar and the note that had changed her life forever. Today wasn't just any day. Today marked 1 year since Charlie had come home. It was hard for Emma to wrap her mind around all the ways their lives had intertwined in that time. How the scared, hollow-eyed dog she had first met at the shelter had become her shadow, her heart, her reason to look forward to each sunrise. She called softly to him, and from the living room Charlie came bounding in, his tail wagging in wide, joyful arcs, his eyes sparkling with a trust so complete it nearly undid her every time she saw it. "Ready for our adventure, sweet boy?" she asked, clipping on his harness. Charlie responded by pressing his head against her hip, a wordless confirmation that wherever she went, he would follow. They drove through winding country roads until they reached a sprawling meadow on the edge of the forest, a place Emma had discovered a few weeks ago and immediately known would be perfect. The meadow was alive with the rustling of tall grass and the chirping of unseen birds, the air rich with the scent of earth and wildflowers. Emma spread the blanket beneath a lone oak tree that stood like a guardian in the center of the field, its broad branches reaching out as if to embrace the sky. Charlie explored first, nose to the ground, his body relaxed and loose with happiness. Emma watched him with a lump in her throat, marveling again at the resilience that lived in his bones, a resilience that had carried him through loss, through fear, through the crushing loneliness of waiting for someone to choose him. And someone had. She had, but if she was honest, it often felt like Charlie had chosen her just as much. When he finally trotted back to her side, Emma sat him down in front of her, reaching into the tote to pull out the old collar and note. She held them out to him, her voice thick with emotion. "This is where you came from, Charlie," she said softly. "And today we're going to honor them. We're going to honor you." Charlie tilted his head, his ears perking in that way he did when he was listening closely, and Emma smiled through the tears that threatened to spill. She read the note aloud once more, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest, letting the words float into the open air like a prayer. She told him about the family who had loved him first, the ones who had taught him to trust, who had left him not out of cruelty, but out of unbearable necessity. She told him that their love had been a gift, not a loss, because without it, he never would have learned how to love again, how to trust her. And then, with shaking hands, Emma dug a small hole at the base of the oak tree, gently laying the old collar and note inside before covering them with rich, dark soil. It was a burial, yes, but not of sorrow. It was a planting, a way to root their shared history deep in the earth, to nourish the life they were still building together. Afterward, they lay side by side on the blanket, the autumn sun warming, their faces, the sounds of the meadow humming around them like a lullaby. Emma ran her fingers through Charlie's fur, marveling at its softness, its warmth. "You're home, Charlie," she whispered. "Forever." As if understanding, Charlie rolled onto his back, exposing his belly, a gesture of ultimate trust. And Emma laughed, a sound so full of pure, unfiltered joy that it seemed to split the very sky open. She rubbed his belly, tears streaming, down her cheeks unchecked, not from sadness but from the overwhelming, unbearable beauty of it all. They stayed that way for hours, two souls mending the wounds of their pasts in the simple, miraculous act of being together. As the sun dipped low, painting the world in strokes of gold and crimson, Emma packed up their things, and they headed back to the car, both moving a little slower, a little heavier with the weight of a perfect day. On the drive home, Charlie curled up on the passenger seat, his head resting against her thigh. His body relaxed in a way that spoke volumes. No more waiting by the door. No more waking in terror. No more wondering if love would last. He was home. As they pulled into the driveway, the porch light flickering on to welcome them, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of peace settle in her bones. She carried the sleeping Charlie inside, cradling him like a child, and tucked him onto their couch, their safe haven. She kissed his head once more and whispered, "Good night, my heart." That night, as she lay in bed listening to Charlie's soft breathing from the foot of the bed, Emma realized something profound. Love doesn't erase the scars. It doesn't pretend the past never happened. It weaves the pain into something beautiful, something strong enough to carry you forward. Charlie's past hadn't broken him. It had shaped him into the soul she had fallen so deeply in love with. And as sleep finally claimed her, Emma dreamed not of sorrow or loss, but of running freely through endless fields with Charlie at her side, the world stretched wide and bright before them, their hearts forever bound by a love deeper than words, stronger than fate.